Great, we'll get started. Good to have so many of you here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Pauline. I'm Pauline Stephen, Chief Executive and Registrar of the General Teaching Council for Scotland. I am joined by lots of the lovely GCC Scotland team. Most people have managed to get the GCS background on them, which they're now showing off. I haven't managed to do that. So folk with a blue background tend to be GCS people. And I'm delighted as well to be joined by Kevin Brack, who I'm going to introduce really shortly, because Kevin is going to offer us some reflections, a bit of a provocation about middle leadership. So we're here today, however you have chosen to prioritise this in your lives towards the end of November in 2023. Excellent work, well done to you. We're delighted that you are here. As I said, this is the event that we have filled the quickest of all of the events that we have done, which says something about creating space for people in middle leadership roles or interested in middle leadership to come together. So we're really, really excited about that. And we're going to focus on leadership, of which there are many analogies about leadership. I've worked in schools for a long time, and I enjoy a transport analogy about who's on the bus, or the train's out of the station before we've got the other one ready, or we've got to turn the tanker around, and all of these different things. But for me, I can't even say it, my leadership model is about hills. So I think whatever our role is that has brought us here, operate in an education landscape together. And we each have a hill, and our jobs are to look after our hill. And we're looking after our spot on the hill. I'm looking after GCS's hill, and you will be looking after a spot on your hill. But as a middle leader, you don't get to stay in your spot. You have to move around that hill and get to know it, to work with everybody down, round, everywhere on your hill, to deeply understand it, so that your hill can be as really, really good as it possibly can be. And sometimes it's not enough to just do work on our own hill. We have to look out and see other people's hills and what's going on for them, what's coming over the horizon. We're in a context of education reform. We're expecting all sorts of announcements about what might happen next for us all, and we will all receive those differently and be expecting certain things in that space. So looking out from our hill is really, really important, but sometimes not even that is enough. And sometimes we have to go and visit a different hill. We have to go and see what's happening on a different hill in our landscape, to get a real sense of where we're going as an entirety, as a system. So today we are welcoming you very much to Hill GTCS, Hill General Teaching Council for Scotland. I really hope you have an enjoyable time. I hope this is fun and you get something out of it. But I am asking you something a bit more specific as well. I would like you to take back to your own hill something from our hill, and it will all, I hope everyone's keeping along with the hills. There's a lot of hills in this chat. My team are really surprised about this, aren't you? They're all like, wow, shock, Pauline speaking about hills again. So you're going to take something back to your own hill that will already be there. It will be in your hill. And you might be using it a lot. It might be a little bit neglected. You may have to reconnect with it a little bit. But that thing is professional standards, because if the GTTS hill was a tiny hill in 1965 when we came about, that little mound was about qualification. Having a qualification as a teacher was seen to really state the professional status of what it meant to be a teacher. And since then, the thing that really gives our hill structure, that holds it up, are the professional standards. And it may surprise some of you to reflect that professional standards have been around in Scotland for 20 years only. And I say only there because I think sometimes we talk about professional standards as though we've always had them and they've always been here. But in 1999, there was a view that we should have professional standards, and 4 were born in the 2000s. None of those focused on middle leadership. So a middle leadership standard has not come about until 2012. And at that point, it was part of standard for leadership and management together with the standard for headship. So it's only since 2021 that the standard for middle leadership has stood on its own as a standard that says something very important about the role and place of middle leadership in Scotland's education system, in our landscape of hills. And I would suggest middle leaders are the people who are running around the landscape, their own hill and others, with a rucksack on their back, finding things out from other people, building solutions together and connecting people together to make change happen. So the thing I would like to ask you to take back to your own hill from your moment here with us this afternoon are to remember the professional standards and pop them in your rucksack for when you're moving around that system. How well are they used? How well do professional standards live on your hill as core to what it means to be a teacher, but maybe even giving us a little bit of structure in this moment of expected change when we're in this context together about reform and what might happen next. So real opportunity. I hope this afternoon to connect yourself with middle leadership and think about what you take back to your hill and help other people connect with. So I am now going to hand over to Kevin. I'm sure Kevin Brack is a name that's known to many of you. Kevin is a lecturer in education leadership, and he's also the programme director of the MEd Leadership and Learning at the University of Edinburgh. And Kevin, we sent your bio out beforehand. It's always I find it quite horrific when somebody reads out your bio and you're there. I find it quite tricky. So what I'm going to say about Kevin is Kevin's been a school leader and he's also worked for national organisations and is now working for a university. So Kevin has travelled and been part of many hills in our landscape, and therefore comes to us this afternoon with a really good world's eye view of our landscape. So Kevin, I'm going to hand over to you. Welcome. It's lovely to have you here. And I think you're going to share your slides yourself. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Pauline. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. It's really a privilege to be able to spend this time with so many different middle leaders across Scotland. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to do so. I'm really excited to share with you some of my thoughts around middle leadership, particularly as Pauline says, at this time when so much is changing in Scottish education, so much is being affected by system reform and the policy developments that are happening, which probably seem, if we're going back to Pauline's hill analogy, at a very, very high level of altitude compared to maybe the daily work that you're doing in your classroom. So hopefully what I'm going to attempt to do today is to draw some lines between the top of that hill and the high altitude of policy and the realities of middle leadership on the ground. So I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that the team's fairies are working well and my slides will appear as if by magic. I wonder, Pauline, would you give me a nod if you can see them appear?
Sure will. They're not up just quite yet, Kevin. We've got you on a big screen. I was wondering if that might be doing something. Oh,
I can see them.
There we go. They're coming. They're coming.
Perfect.
There we go. We've got them fine, Kevin. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much indeed. So I think the first kind of question to start off with is, why am I here? Why am I coming to talk to you about middle leadership and management? And as Pauline said, I've been lucky enough to have a number of different roles in our system. I once aspired to be a middle leader when I was a class teacher in primary schools. I was a principal teacher for a number of years as a middle leader. I also worked when I was a head teacher with a whole range of middle leaders in different roles and really valued the opportunity to work and support middle leaders in their practice. And now I'm a lecturer in educational leadership at the University of Edinburgh, and I teach middle leadership to a number of fantastic students. So I've been really fortunate to have all those different positions. But what I want to talk to you about today is not about me, but about actually what is happening with our system and the amount of educational reform that is happening currently, and what is the role of middle leaders at this particular time, because I really feel quite strongly that there's a great opportunity for middle leaders to be found within this reform agenda. And in fact, if we don't find a role for middle leaders within this reform agenda, it runs the risk of not being successful. I always think it's helpful before somebody starts speaking if they kind of share with you what their assumptions are, because I think a lot of us work with a lot of assumptions when we're talking about education and thinking about our practice. So my assumptions around this work, first of all, is that without middle leadership and without the impact and influence of middle leaders, very little reform is possible in our system. And that really underlines the importance of your role as future and current middle leaders in our system. And I think, as I said before, this time of reform really puts into really sharp definition the role of middle leaders. So hopefully this is an opportunity for us to really build the profile and impact of middle leadership across our system. And the last assumption I would make is it's really, really complicated, because middle leadership is a term and a concept which is very contested and has lots of different meanings and roles within it. So those are the assumptions that I'm bringing to this work. And as we begin, I just wanted to flag to you how important it is that we have got a standard for middle leadership in our system. And it's something that, as Pauline said, is not common across the world. A lot of systems don't have standards that are articulated at all in this way, and many don't have standards for middle leadership, and we're lucky to have it. Well, why are we lucky to have it? I think mainly because it centres the role and the work and the impact of middle leaders in our system. And it helps to clarify the unique nature of middle leadership and all the work and the complexity that sits within that. And I think that the complexity is absolutely captured within our standard for middle leadership in Scotland. So today I'm going to be focusing on one aspect of the standard in the thoughts I'm going to share with you. And that is this part here, which really underlines the importance of middle leaders in our system, really understanding policy, being really engaged in policy, and having a really good understanding of the developments that happen within our education system in Scotland and globally as well. But I think what's really important to highlight is that in the standards, it's not just an understanding, it's a critical understanding of these developments. So the standards are encouraging us to think really critically about the developments that happen within education, how they link into wider societal and global trends, and what our role is within that. So I think what we have within this part of the standard is permission, and it gives us a warrant for focusing on this aspect of our work. And I know often this isn't the part of the job that you spend the most time thinking about or talking about, but it's an incredibly important and crucial part of your work as middle leaders. So, as I said before, we are operating within a very crowded policy landscape currently in Scotland. This slide here, very kindly, Ollie Bray from Education Scotland shared this with our into headship students this year, and I think he was really candid and honest about the fact that since the OECD review in 2021, there has been an absolute plethora of different policies, reviews, consultations, and absolute tonnage of documentation that's been released since then. And I'm lucky enough in my job to spend a lot of time looking at this sort of stuff, studying educational reform and teaching educational reform, and I struggle sometimes to keep up with the absolute volume that comes out. So it is a very complex and crowded policy landscape. And often when you're in a role that is as busy as middle leadership roles often are, it can feel tempting to disengage from that and think it's too crowded, it's too complex, I'm just going to disengage and focus on the day job because the day job is demanding enough. But I think that's a real missed opportunity, and that's what I'm hoping to encourage and stimulate discussion about in the presentation this afternoon. So I think it's important to mention, what do we as a system believe about middle leadership? And I think there's a really good articulation of what we believe as a system about middle leadership within the standard, as I said. I think one of the things that I would point out, and it's really clear within the standards, is middle leadership is unique and distinct from teacher leadership and senior leadership. And often, people describe it as the jam in the sandwich of school leadership, because it's not this senior strategic level, and it's not teachers who are taking on leadership responsibilities and roles. It is very much sandwiched between those two important aspects. I think that is very clearly articulated within the standard. And it's also, as Ford and Kerrigan have said, a really slippery concept in that it's really hard to define, because there'll be people on this call who will have full class responsibility or who will have no class responsibility. There'll be folk who work in head of department roles in really big secondary schools. There'll be folk who work in schools with 1 or 2 classes. It's an incredibly difficult concept to define and to kind of pin down. And I think we've got to be aware of that when we think about how middle leadership operates within our system. One of the things that is so clear that I know you'll have heard before is that middle leadership is really the engine room of educational change. Nothing really moves forward in any significant way in education, some would argue, without the role of middle leaders within our schools. And I think that is very clear across the country in terms of a lot of the conversations that I have and a lot of the experiences I've seen within our practice. And that is because of the next point there that I've made around how close middle leadership is to the classroom. And it's that proximity to practice, as Leithwood says, which is so vital, because as a middle leader of it, quite often you are seeing things in the classroom that those who are perhaps above you in the leadership hierarchy are not seeing. So you're getting the chance to influence practice and change practice, but you're also crucially being able to see the things that need to be changed and feeding that back up into other layers of the system as well. So that closeness to practice is absolutely crucial. And that positions middle leaders, as Early and Bubb says, as key brokers within schools. And I think, I'm sure you'll recognise how key your role is in terms of the negotiation, the dance of enacting change and improvement within your school. And because it does occupy such a unique space, it's a really complex space, and it's often an area of leadership that is not hugely well understood or supported, because quite often people think of middle leadership as a kind of stopping off point on the route, on the journey towards headship or towards more senior strategic leadership, when in actual fact middle leadership is a destination in itself. And I think the more we value middle leadership as a destination, the better. I think over recent years, particularly when you think about how things like the Scottish Attainment Challenge have changed our practice within Scotland, the roles of middle leadership have developed and have been evolving over that time. Lots of folk have taken on roles that have been funded by streams like PEF, which have allowed folk to take on new and different types of leadership roles within the system. So if that's what we believe about middle leadership, what are some of the opportunities and some of the challenges of being a middle leader currently? I think one of the great opportunities is that fact that you're leading learning and teaching, you're leading pedagogical change and innovation from the core site of the school. You're not sitting at policy level, you're not sitting in the middle, you're not sitting, in a space that's outside of the school. You're sitting absolutely in the core site of learning and teaching within a school, and that gives you huge opportunity to change and to enhance practice. Often middle leaders, not always, but often the leaders get the chance to lead rather than manage. And what I mean by that is often because of your role, because of your position and your proximity to practice, you're able to be involved in innovating, changing, leading changes to pedagogy, changes to things that really impact on children and on young people within our schools. And you can see that close up. So you're not often as tied up with some of the operational constraints that you sometimes have in more senior or strategic roles. And I think that gives you good scope to be innovative. And I think so often, I know in my own practice and in the work of the students that I teach now, I see huge amounts of innovation because of the unique position that middle leaders hold within our system. And I think it's really making sure that as a system, we give folk that opportunity and we allow middle leaders to be involved in strategic, innovative change at all levels. However, there can be challenges with the role of a middle leader, because quite often you are having to deal with lots of the day-to-day stuff. You are having to deal with lots of interactions with colleagues. Sometimes those colleagues are former peers. I know a lot of folk end up in middle leader roles in schools that they've previously been a teacher in, and sometimes navigating those relationships with peers, managing colleagues who used to be your peers, can be really difficult, and that is often a challenge that middle leaders find within our system. And also because middle leaders operate within different spaces and different cultures, that can be really challenging too. So that they operate within sometimes the culture of a leadership team within a school or within a cluster or a wider local authority level, but they also operate within a department or within a stage in a primary school. And so the different spaces and cultures that middle leaders inhabit can often be quite difficult to traverse and to navigate their way through. And that leads to multiple accountabilities. And often middle leaders feel like, you might feel like this yourself today or sometime in the past or in the future, that you're being pulled in lots of different directions, that you're accountable to lots of different layers within the system. So if we are in this time of reform, and if we are going to really support and challenge our middle leaders to be leaders of reform and to enact the changes that are required to meet the ambitions of the reform across the country, then there's things we have to do to support our middle leaders and to support the development of middle leadership across the system. I think the first thing that comes to mind to me is making distributed leadership really authentically leadership and authentic distribution. Very often, I'm talking to students about distributed leadership, they talk about, well, it's just delegation. You just get things from somebody else's plate that get pushed onto your plate, and it's now your responsibility. I think if we're going to have genuine reform that is led by intelligence and knowledge and experience and expertise in the classroom, then leadership opportunities have to be given really authentically to middle leaders, because they are the ones that have, as we've discussed, the proximity to practice that is necessary. So it can't just be a task that somebody's given you. You have to be given the opportunity and the tools and the responsibility to be able to lead the changes that are going to be necessary. I think what's really striking to me is a paper in there with Christine Ford and colleagues who've talked about how often middle leaders are just conduits to reforms. They're just operationalizing or enacting the reforms that are decided by other people. And I think that is something that is really key, and hopefully we're going to discuss as the afternoon goes on, of how we can use your voices and your experience as middle leaders to contribute to future reform within the system. But to be able to do that, we need positive school cultures where middle leadership is recognised, where it's understood, where middle leaders are given authentic opportunities to lead and are given the support and resources necessary to do that. And that's at individual school level, but it's also at local authority level and at national level as well within our system. And there's an idea there from Lara's daughter and O'Connor, who talk about how the positional leadership is often, more paramount than influential leadership. And I would argue that middle leaders have got the great opportunity of having influence. And I think influence is so key. Often we talk about impact in education in lots of different ways, but I think influence is such a helpful term in thinking about the role that middle leaders have within our system and how they can influence that change. So I'm hoping that within our conversations today, we're going to talk about how middle leaders can be influential in this space of reform. So in order to do all these things that perhaps reform asks of us, we've got to think about what are the professional learning needs of middle leaders. And there's a really good suggestion from Ing and Chan, who talk about the fact that what is required in terms of professional learning is these different aspects. Professional learning for middle leaders and future middle leaders in leadership, in concepts of leadership, in how you enact leadership, in all the kind of richness of what leadership means. That's important, but that's only one dimension. The other dimension they pick up on is continued professional learning in pedagogy, because as a middle leader, as you know, so much of your work is based on really sound, really well considered notions of effective learning and teaching. And so therefore, to do that, you've got to continue to grow your own knowledge and understanding of pedagogy. So to do that, you've got to have that professional learning alongside the leadership professional learning that sits and connects to it. But also, crucially, the leadership of pedagogy, because it's fine to know about leadership and it's fine to know about pedagogy, but it's actually those two things together, and knowing how best to support, to challenge, to coach, mentor, negotiate forward for better learning and teaching within the school context that you work in. So I would agree that those three aspects are really crucial in terms of the offer going forward for middle leaders within our system. So we're very shortly going to move into breakout groups, and there's three kind of big questions we'd like you to consider. And I think there's going to be a Padlet for you to put your thoughts on, and then we're going to have a chance to feed back to each other and discuss at the end of the session some of your responses to these questions. So the first thing is, what do you see as your role as a middle leader in wider system reform? So going back to that element of the standard that we talked about at the beginning, how do you see yourself within the reform agenda? Do you see yourself being a part of it? Do you feel like so far you've had a voice, you've been listened to, you've been heard in terms of your own knowledge and experience within the reform agenda? So that's the first aspect. The second aspect is, what are the factors currently which are either enabling you or limiting you to play a larger role in the big changes in Scottish education? So what do you need, I guess, from the system in terms of managing some of those limiting or enabling factors? And lastly, what professional learning seems most helpful to you to allow you to strengthen your professional voice in the wider system? So what learning opportunities or spaces might be helpful for you in developing your professional voice and your professional confidence and allowing you to contribute to the wider system? So those are three areas that we're going to be discussing in breakouts. And I don't know, Pauline or Asif, if you're going to do the technical stuff before we go into our groups. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Kevin. That was great. You've set us off in a good space, ready to go into groups. We will make that happen shortly. I just wanted to reflect, Kevin, you talked about a couple of my favourite themes, that we have a complex system. It's super complex. We're not going to improve it by pretending it's not. We have to harness the complexity, and I think middle leadership, as you expressed, has a real critical role in that space. And I loved you talking about influence. When I've got a tricky problem, I still use CIA in my head. What can I control? What can I influence? And what do I have to accept and get on with and make a plan for? And I think that influence area is really, really critical to the space that middle leadership occupies. So with that in mind, we're going to go into groups. I'm going to just look for somebody to give me the nod that somebody's sorting that out in the background. If you move to a group, everybody, and you get pinged out, don't worry about it. You'll come back and join Kevin and I, and we'll have a chat until we get you back in a group. So don't worry about that at all. Are we ready to get everyone into groups now?
Yes, we're just about to send everybody off. It'll take a couple of seconds.
All right. See you shortly, everyone. Yeah, I think that's us. We're still moving about. I hope you really enjoyed your chat together in the groups. We are going to be finishing our chat today at 5 o'clock because this is a quick hour of fun where we finish on time, which gives Kevin, you and I was going to say 9 minutes, but it's just changed to 8, so I'll start speaking quicker. This gives us 8 minutes to reflect on what we're seeing in the Padlet from some of the themes of conversation. And I think as well for everybody that the chat is now open on here if you want to leave any comments in what we're going to speak about next. But Kevin and I have been looking at the Padlet as it's being populated, and Kevin, it got us talking about professional confidence, didn't it? We saw some comments that really reflected what being the jam in the middle might feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think professional confidence and the ability to use and develop your own professional voice came across really strongly in the Padlet. And I think that is such a crucial aspect when we're thinking about education reform. And I think one of the things that we reflected on in our discussion was there's no one way to use your professional voice. It's not like I think you said like a how-to toolkit of how to use your professional voice. There isn't one way to do it. And very often, a lot of the ways that we nudge forward the system in meaningful ways is through the stuff that we do every single day in the conversations we have with colleagues, in how we plan and structure our professional learning, how we offer opportunities at school level and wider for folk to be involved in these issues. So I think the kind of message I'd like to get across is it's really important to use your voice, but there's not a right or a wrong way to do it. And I think it is absolutely personal, contextual, situational to you. And that is absolutely for you to decide how best to use your voice. As long as you do, that's the important bit.
Yeah, I think I believe there's always a chat about how we hear teacher voice. And as a system, we need to have a better way of that being embedded as core. So it's not just like, oh, there's a review coming along, we better listen to people and what they've got to say, but actually there's a systematic way of making that happen happen. Saying to Kevin earlier, there are 82,000 teachers on the register of teachers in Scotland. They will not all have one voice. They will not all believe and think the same thing. We've got to get better at sharing ideas and challenging each other. I think that's why, Kevin, when you spoke earlier, you highlighted the word critical in the professional standards. And I think sometimes maybe possibly people think that means critiquing things, and it's not quite the same. Do you want to say a little bit more about, you know, the importance of sort of bringing critical thinking to this? I would say, to answer my own question, I do that all the time, it's really irritating. This is not a what works. You don't open up the head of a middle leader and put thoughts and thinking in it and shut it, and every middle leader is the same. It's what you said about bringing your unique self to being a middle leader and being confident to have a critical voice. So maybe not just a voice, but a critical one, Kevin. Is that a step too far? It's what the standard's asking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, all those things that you mentioned there talk to the humanness of leadership. And I think that is what makes leadership so interesting, exciting, but also really challenging, is that it's absolutely a human endeavor that we all do in our own unique way. I think I was really struck by one of the comments in the Padlet about, you know, we've got a real fear of getting things wrong or being critical, as in understanding it as criticizing rather than being, you know, critically informed. And I think, you know, like you say, the standard is giving you permission as a middle leader in Scotland to have a critical understanding and a critical perspective of, you know, the changes that happen within the system. And to me, there's lots of different ways to understand, you know, critically informed, but I think it is about being informed by a variety of sources, by really educating ourselves in some of the kind of big concepts and big ideas that are within education and within our system, and then expressing our considered and informed view, because everyone's got an opinion and everyone's entitled to their opinion. But for me, being critical is about having that critically informed position that is informed by all the reading and the thinking and discussion and professional dialogue that you do as part of your role in school, but that you probably do a lot of the time at the weekends and night times as well. So I think the more we can engage our profession in that, the better.
And it looks to me from the Padlet chat, Kevin, that to do that well as a system, we really need to tackle issues with time and space. You know, so I mean, GTCS have been asking teachers about their professional learning for almost 10 years now, and it comes back consistently, time and space. And I think if we had the answer to cracking that, we would have done it as a system by now. We probably need something very differently to happen structurally to free up time and space to make it happen. And you and I were talking about Pazzi Selberg's new book, which some people might know a little bit about. It's not brand new, maybe 21, was it, In Teachers We Trust? And he's got a couple of concepts there that speak to what you just said, Kevin, that we should be educating teachers to think this is not, this thing works only and we all must do it. And that we want teachers, and I would suggest particularly middle leaders, to be free within a framework. There's a framework in which we all work and live and breathe, but there's freedom in that to be our own unique people. I think maybe there's somebody in the chat there talking about professional recognition, and maybe sort of owning the professional standard for middle leadership is really critical to that. What else did you pick up, Kevin? Did you like free within a framework? I think Pazzi was pleased with himself when he came up with that one.
Yeah, it's a catchy one for sure.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important. And I think very often, because any job within education, particularly when you're in a leadership role that often has a lot of teaching alongside it too, is incredibly demanding intellectually, emotionally, you know, physically, spiritually. It's a really demanding job. It feels sometimes really difficult to have, you know, the space, the time, the opportunity, the energy to engage in these things. But I think, you know, certainly what the standards has given us, and from what we've talked about today, it is of absolute vital importance that folk do think of ways to use their voice. And even if that is a 5-minute conversation in the staff room with somebody about what's going on in the system, it's a small step in the right direction. So despite the busyness of our educational policy landscape and the priorities that we have every single day in our working lives, I think trying to carve out that little bit of time for yourself to think critically and to contribute in a way that's going to make some meaningful change is really important.
Thanks, Kevin. And I see that someone's popped in the Padlet recently about some structured learning that it might be required. And I think a little bee that we have in our bonnet at GTCS is, what is the model of teacher education from initial teacher education through induction, through your career, into, if you wish, a leadership role? You know, how is your education supported? Time, space, funding. Kevin and I were talking about master's level funding and, you know, concern around about that. But I also see that someone's popped in opportunities to collaborate with other middle leaders. And so I suppose to finish up tonight, I hope that's a little bit of what you've managed to get with your time with us tonight. We call these events Connecting deliberately, because we think that people who do similar jobs and work with similar professional standards should have the chance to get together and talk and share and grow and develop together. So we hope you found that really, really helpful. Kevin, a huge thanks to you. Thanks for doing this for us. It's been great to see you and hear you again, and offer us your thoughts and provocation. And best wishes to everybody on your journey. You have a wee evaluation link for us. Please let us know what you think, and if these types of things, events like this, are helpful to you or not. And it's 5 o'clock, and I'm going to stop speaking and say I declare it's tea time. Okay, so see you all later. Lovely to have you join us this